Hey, good morning, everybody. HR First Online again. Today, with a very special guest from another continent. We had one speaker already from this continent, but today with us, Iwo Szapar. Hi, Iwo.
Hey, good to be here.
A remote work advocate. And just to underline this point, he is right now in Vietnam.
That's correct. Proving the point that you can work from anywhere.
Exactly. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what is the mission, what is the burning desire to talk about or to show remote work and what kind of things you do.
Sure. So we are doing remote work since 2017. So before it was cool and before the whole world started to work remotely, we went on this mission because the freedom of choice where you work is something very important to the growing number of people all over the world. This is something what we noticed in the US when we lived there. It was 3 years ago, so quite some time is already gone. But this desire still remains, and it's actually growing. So we went on this mission, the crazy mission, to convince more companies to the concept of working remotely, allowing their people to work basically whenever they are. And it's been a very fun and interesting journey. From the day one, we focused a lot on education because that's the main blocker besides the mindset that people have, like, oh, we are afraid of change, this is something new, but once they cross the mindset aspect, they're like, okay, how we are going to do this? And as you have a lot of companies that succeeded in the remote work space, and they are distributed for years, and they are over 1,000 people without office, worth billions of dollars. So you have an answer that yes, it could be done. But then the question is how you're actually doing this. So that's why at Remote How we have a lot of initiatives that are helping both managers, HR, and individual contributors learn how to make remote work, both from creating the culture, knowing how to lead distributed teams, or working remotely. So the education was with us from the day one, and this is what we continue right now, starting to explore the aspect of the community and the culture, what is extremely important when we are talking about remote work. So overall, we were actually disrupting the way how people are working, how companies are operating, and that's why it's super exciting, because whenever you're changing the status quo, but status that is actually really desired by people, then it brings a lot of positive energy, and this is what pushes us since quite some time now.
Sounds good. Living a dream in Vietnam. Hey.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of also clarify that the Vietnam aspect, when we moved out from the States in 2018, we've been living in different places, so it's hard to tell where's our home right now. And this is also the beauty of remote work, that you can make the choice where you work, where you live. And for some of us, it will be, oh, I just don't want to commute every day and be in the traffic, I would like to live in the suburbs. For some of us, it will be, oh, I would like to spend more time with my children. And for some of us, it will be, I would like to have an option to work a couple of months a year in some other location. So in general, it's giving people the choice, and then there are different choices. This is our choice that we are in Vietnam, but this freedom is extremely important for a lot of people right now, and HR executives, C-levels need to understand that this is not even the future, this is the reality, and they need to address that.
Absolutely. And so your company, or your team, helps companies or individuals move into this direction. But tell me, what's the most common way of doing it? Is it entire companies trying to move remote, or is it a team in a company going remote, or it's an individual in a company? So it's all three looks different with different sets of problems etc.?
Yes. So we see all of these three options in the real life scenarios. Of course, in the pre-COVID era, we haven't seen that many companies moving completely to remote. So right now, companies were forced. We work both with companies that were already hybrids, meaning that they have office and they've also remote workers like HubSpot, Techstars, so well-known established companies, but as well as a lot of startups, but also corporate clients like PwC, Deloitte. So full spectrum of types of companies that we work with. Then looking at the typical challenges, there is one common if we are talking about companies that are just starting. This is the lack of trust. And the lack of trust is something that goes far beyond than just having people working remotely, because it also affects our day-to-day life. There are studies showing that we are trusting more robots than our managers, which is super frightening. So when I'm thinking about typical mistakes / challenges, lack of trust is the first one, and it really impacts a lot of different areas when you're thinking about going remote when it's already happening. The second one, the misconception is that companies, teams, individuals continue to work the same way as in the office. It's a different environment, it's a different setup, and you need to understand that it needs to be embraced differently. There are different ways of working, managing, there are different processes, you communicate differently, the culture is different, so a lot of aspects need to be adjusted. And then we are landing at the third aspect that is connected to this. So companies are actually not preparing themselves or their staff to work remotely, to manage remote teams, so there is a lack of education. There is a lack of standard operating procedures that are extremely important when you're thinking about having a consistent way of working. In the office environment, oftentimes people were just like working ad hoc, randomly, yeah, this is important, going and rushing. Oftentimes there was really a lack of structure. Remote work is, that's why it's so beautiful, and it's actually taking companies to another level because it encourages them to become better. To whenever there is a way of doing things X in the office, in remote it needs to be optimized. It needs to be written down, clearly defined, and then it positively impacts the whole team, organization, or individual. So kind of summarizing, lack of trust, continuing to work as in the office, lack of education, lack of standard operating procedures. Those are the mistakes that we see. And of course, probably further down the road, we'll chat a bit about the culture aspect, which is extremely important from the HR perspective. On this one, we could probably write a whole book.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go into that direction, because as you say, as you talk about this, it comes through very clearly that remote work is not a location issue. It is a location issue as well, but it's much more than that. And tell us what happened in COVID, because I did many interviews, many from US, gig economy and all kinds of people, and many of them said, well, not much happened. It's just people do the same way of working from home. But what you are talking about is a bit different. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of all this. And the question is, what do you think? What COVID did in this respect? Is it just people did the same from home and now they go back and do the same from the office, or there will be a change? What do you think?
Yeah. So there was a very interesting study that came out around a month when we were already in the pandemic. Gallup found out that 74% of CFOs expect to have people working permanently post-COVID remotely, depending 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days a week. So we already see, and what you can see in major companies announcing, like Facebook, for example, that they will permanently shift, like Shopify, to remote work at least until end of this year. So this is the reality that we need to embrace. And then the question is, if we are going to do it right, or if we will be, oh no, this is not for us, we need to all get back to the office. This is something that if C-levels, executives, if managers will decide, there will be a humongous pushback from employee side, because from studies all across the board, people were expecting remote work flexibility for years, and now they got it. So we are meeting their expectations. So kind of speaking the language of HR, we are working on retention metrics. Like retention, one of the key aspects and the key challenges, everyone is talking about it on HR conferences, how to better retain people, how to make them happier. This is the tool. Remote work is the best way how you can retain people, how you can make employees happier. And now the question is if you know how to do it, right? One of the key components that we see during the COVID pandemic for companies that rapidly shifted to remote work is to address the culture. Because basically companies are turning into virtual communities where they need to replicate or adjust or even create from the scratch the company culture. So the whole topic of employee engagement and thriving this culture is something that we noticed brings a lot of the challenges from the HR side. It probably is one of the biggest one that they need to address. So COVID basically accelerated the change that was going to happen over the next years. So there is no way of getting away from this. Now is the question how you can address it, so both your employees as well as the business will benefit from this change.
Absolutely. So it's culture, and the question is how will managers handle it, because remote work also is kind of results only work environment, or it is closer to that, because when you work remotely, nobody can clock how much hour you spend in front of the computer or wherever. And I just had recently a very interesting interview about results only work environment, and there we discussed the interesting question that current managers are not necessarily trained for results only work environment, because they are trained for the old hierarchical, so how to manage that change, how to manage that cultural change when you have an organization full of managers who are very good at doing something that is maybe not anymore needed?
Yes, this is a very good question. And actually, as Remote How, we found this answer like around a year ago, that managers are the key to the success, the key component within the organization to succeed or fail with remote work when it comes to such shift. So that's why also we build a program for managers to learn how to lead distributed teams, both from the ones that are already doing this but never learned it, or the ones that are just found themselves in the new situation and now they need to embrace it. So what we see here is that there are unfortunately still a lot of bad management practices in the office world that are not applicable in remote. Basically, what we are talking about when it comes to leading the distributed teams, in a lot of cases, those are the good practices that should be utilized already in the office. So there are foundations where basically managers should be doing for years, but office culture didn't embrace it, and we are still repeating a lot of mistakes. Focusing on outcome is just one of them, but it's extremely fundamental. What you mentioned about clocking the hours, I'm personally not a big fan of clocking the hours, but of course there are softwares that are supporting that, like for example Time Doctor or Toggle. if a manager would like to have such a measurement of work, it also can be done, because there are some works when it's harder to have the KPIs on the outcome. It's more, for example, on being available and responding to some requests, for example, like in customer support, right? So it's definitely a mindset shift. That this is how the work can be done. So a lot of work needs to be done on the leadership development, but then also going more into operational ways, how you're actually managing the work. You need to become more of a leader that is supporting and not, and this is the key word, not micromanaging. Because this is like, finally 2020 is the official day when we are finally shutting down micromanagement. Like, micromanagement won't work anymore. If some of you are listening to us, micromanagement is gone. And if you will try to micromanage people remotely, you will fail. They will get upset, and this is basically the end of trying to achieve the success in a distributed workforce. So I would strongly encourage you to look at this factor, and then also looking at the manager perspective. We are not predicting that offices will disappear. This is not the story that will happen within the next years. What we will see is the growth of hybrid teams, meaning that there will be people working from the office, working remotely, people doing two things, and just changing. And this is the tricky part. Before COVID, a lot of experts, when asked about suggested format of remote work that they are advising, hybrid wasn't there. Everyone was like, oh, you should go all remote because this is easier to maintain. Within the current setup in the post-pandemic world, you will need to manage both environments, the office one and the non-office one. And this is really tricky, looking at a lot of aspects, starting from culture, that the virtual or non-virtual community that you will have there, looking at the processes, how you communicate, you make sure that everyone is included in the conversation, doesn't matter where they are, but everyone is treated equally. So basically, a lot of managers need to redefine what kind of leaders they are and what kind of management they will have in place, because otherwise, I will repeat it again, they will fail. It's not that you can just move to remote and it will work just out of the blue. It might work for a month or two, but looking at the long term, you will have more and more challenges across the board.
I like to call this period the moments of truth. And it's so good to hear. I hope it's true, but to say that the micromanagement is dead.
It is. I mean, we just need to keep repeating that it's dead, because this is something what, like, a lot of people tried to implement for years. But what I also noticed myself, like, I first started to work remotely in 2011. Jesus, 9 years ago, quite some time. I wasn't working remotely all the time for that period. But when I moved to all remote in late 2017, I still had a bit of micromanagement-ish moments. And I learned the hard way that this is not the way how you should be doing this, not just for the sake of micromanagement, but also looking at the other side. When you're not micromanaging, you're starting to trust more your team. You're giving them more accountability. You're giving them. They are becoming responsible for what you want them to achieve, right? It's more about the end goal, like we just discussed, the focus on outcome, rather the way of one small task, second task, small. Of course, you're supporting them along the way, right? It's not that, okay, I want you to do this by end of the month and then I'm gone. No. You're supporting, but you're not pointing fingers on what they should be doing every day and checking if this is done, right? So it's coming. We just need to be very consistent with making sure that we fight with micromanagement.
HR Fest is here to spread this message. You speak from our hearts. You know, I have a daughter, as we just discussed before the start. She's gonna be 7 years old, and I worked for large multinational companies before I started being a remote worker. HR Fest is fully remote. We never had an office, and we are never gonna have one. I hope. And I felt sometimes working for these large corporations. I loved them, and we were very successful. But I felt like my 7-year-old child feels with me, I think. So, you know, they told me where to park. They told me when to come in. They told me what kind of car I can have. They told me what kind of computer I should have. They told me when, you know, all these kind of things which you never felt adult in this relationship, no? And what I like a lot in this new movement is that it's like you start taking the other party seriously, giving them responsibility, giving them.
Yes, and to what you said, it's like giving the control back to people, which is really empowering, right? We like in the HR world, we're talking a lot about empowering people, and this is finally a moment when you can actually empower them and have something back, like in return, right? Because at the end of the day, it's business. So you also need to look at the other side. So really, remote work is a win-win scenario, and all of our listeners who are still hesitant, they need to finally understand this is win-win. This is not I'm giving something away and I'm not getting anything in return. It's a fair win-win.
Is there, in your practice, is there a type of personality or a kind of business or an industry which is not good for remote work?
I mean, obviously, anything that truly requires physical connection.
But other than that?
Yeah. But other than that, no. I mean, you need a laptop, you need internet, you need video connection, and that's it. And you need specific tools. So, of course not. But what I will say is that offline connections, like real life connections, are extremely important. So what we see among a lot of remote teams, remote companies, is that they meet each other in the offline world. So it's not that they are just like 100% virtual, we never see each other. No. They organize annual retreats, quarterly retreats, there are team meetings. So it's happening, right? But it's important that they are giving a choice, right? But they also understand that the personal connection is basically significant. It's essential to establish from time to time, from many aspects, also from the mental health perspective, but just like also having fun. You can have so much fun over virtual stuff, but also in the real world there are also interesting activities how you can bond.
Absolutely, you need it. So what is the role of the office in the future? Not in 1 year, but in 10, 15 years. What do you think? What will people do in the office? What type of activity will an office be needed?
Sure. So first of all, meetings place. It will be less about working. It will be more about meeting. And that's funny to say, because oftentimes, let's say last year you heard like, oh, I will be working from home today because I need to get stuff done. And this is insane, because office is a place where you're getting stuff done, not your home. So we will see this shift. So it will be about meetings. It will be about collaboration. And also having fun, but then also on the fun activities, it will largely move also to virtual to make it more flexible. So what we see right now is that companies are figuring out how to address the employee perks and fun activities in the virtual world. And on this front, we're actually launching a very interesting initiative, virtual co-working, where employees will be able to access all sorts of professional events, knowledge sharing, deep working discussions, but also well-being sessions. So basically, from the HR perspective, it will be to redefine how you build the culture, build the workplace. Some of the things that you were doing in the past will move to virtual. Let's say learning and development. Hey, I can come into virtual co-working and have an amazing workshop on ABC, or hey, I can come in there and have a yoga session in the morning. I don't need to go anywhere. It's just on a flexible schedule. So a lot of things how HR were doing, their thing needs to be adjusted. Also looking at the hiring aspect. So basically right now you can hire from anywhere if you're opening to a global talent pool. So coming back to the simple answer on the office, meetings, collaboration, and some part of the culture building. But on the culture building, you need to be very cautious, because if you have people that are also all remote, like 100% remote workers, you need to create an environment that is inclusive, right? And this is the tricky part with the hybrid setup, that there is an office, but there are people that will never ever come to this office. So we need to make sure that everyone is treated equally, and that this culture remains the same in these two worlds that you're trying to build together.
When I read about you before doing this interview, one of the things I like the most is that if I saw well that you do all kinds of training sessions, or kind of an academy to train people how to do remote work correctly, which I think is absolutely great, because now everybody went home and everybody said that, hey, if I'm working from home, that's going to be just so cool, much more time, no travel, etc., etc. But it's a very good point that we have to remember that it has to be set up in a right way to have it really functioning. It has to be well thought out, well thought of. So that's a very good message that you do.
Yes, I completely agree, because a lot of people are talking about the good sides of remote work, the benefits, how awesome it is, etc. And this is what I'm doing all day long. But we also need to remember that you can fail, because this is something different. So you cannot just simply replicate and take one-to-one how you were operating previously, because then it can basically do a huge backlash and a black PR to the whole remote work movement that was doing a good job for years, growing and building the best practices, with the headlines, oh, remote work doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't work because you did it right. So of course it won't work. So you need to be very cautious and learn from these companies, these experts that already embraced it. So we are not making the same mistakes as they did, because people in the remote workspace, this is what I learned when I started to be a part of this movement, are extremely transparent, are extremely honest. And thanks to this honesty and transparency, you can see how you can actually learn from this sometimes ugly picture. So you're not replicating this into your world. And one thing about the transparency, there is a company called Buffer, one of our partners, and some time ago, like it will be already years, they started to publish their salaries online, salaries, all the costs, etc. So basically their whole P&L is public. So this is the kind of level of transparency and a different approach on running a company that is potentially ahead of us, which I'm extremely exciting, because again it's questioning the status quo and how we are working right now. And maybe one last thing, Also, Buffer just finished their 4-day week experiment, and they announced that they will prolong it until end of the year. So probably, and this is my prediction / hope, is that after the remote work revolution, this is the next revolution that is coming. And keeping my fingers crossed.
Absolutely. That's our heart is in it as well. Okay, that was excellent discussion. But one last question. I cannot avoid asking about your name and your origins.
Of course, yes. So in 19th century, my family was based in Hungary. So if you Google my last name Szapar, you will find a small village that is in Hungary. I visited this place with my family some time ago. So my origins are are from Hungary. Actually, I visited Budapest last year. Tremendous city. So I'm looking forward to be back in Europe soon and hopefully visiting you guys as well.
Yes, always welcome. That also means that we can travel and you can travel and we have events. So I hope I see you on the HR Fest stage soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. And then not forget micromanagement is dead and other great messages. That was a good morning for us. I hope a great afternoon for you. Now you should go out and jump into the pool.
Too many emails.
Okay. Great talking to you. Keep in touch.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Ciao, ciao.